Have you ever tried to stop thinking for a moment and failed? The mind never goes silent. It projects fears, replays the past, creates scenarios that may never happen. But do you really have to believe everything it tells you? The power of observing your thoughts can free you from this endless cycle, but almost no one realizes it. Are your thoughts truly yours, or were they programmed by something greater? If you've ever felt like your mind controls you more than it should, maybe it's time to see the truth behind it. And the answer is closer than you think. The mind never shuts up. It talks non-stop, no breaks, no rest. There's a voice inside your head narrating every experience, analyzing every situation, and often judging without you even realizing it. Puranix, what if that voice isn't really you? Have you ever tried just for a moment to stop and listen? Not respond, not judge, not get involved, just observe? What would happen if, instead of following every thought as if it were absolute truth, you started seeing them like clouds in the sky, appearing and disappearing beyond your control? Most people live completely identified with their minds. They don't realize they are not their thoughts. They are the ones observing them. And that is one of the deepest secrets of ancient spiritual and occult traditions. Mastering the mind begins when we stop confusing ourselves with it. The problem is, no one teaches us this. Since childhood, we've been taught to blindly trust our inner voice. If it says something is true, we believe it. If it fills us with worry, we panic. If it reminds us of a past mistake, we feel guilty as if we were reliving it all over again. But do we really have to be prisoners of this endless narrative? Great spiritual masters, from Eastern sages to Western Hermeticists, have always taught that the mind is a tool, not the master. And this is exactly where the Hermetic principles come into play. If everything in the universe is mental, as the principle of mentalism teaches, then the first step to transforming your external reality is learning to take control of what's happening inside your own head. Observing your thoughts doesn't mean ignoring or suppressing them. It means realizing they're not absolute truth, just waves moving through the ocean of your consciousness. If you learn how to surf those waves instead of being dragged under by them, your entire experience of life can change. But how do you actually do that? How can you apply this knowledge in daily life in a simple, practical way? How do you turn mental chaos into spiritual clarity? Let's explore these questions together, uncovering the hidden secrets behind human thought and its connection to the Hermetic principles. Have you ever noticed how your mind never stops talking? All the time, there's a voice inside you narrating what's happening, analyzing situations, planning the future, and replaying the past. But here's something most people don't realize. That voice isn't always reliable. Sometimes it lifts you up. Other times it tears you down. One moment it tells you everything will be fine. The next it fills your head with fear and doubt. If you pay attention, you'll see that your mind contradicts itself all the time. Yet most people trust it without question. Thoughts can be a powerful ally when used consciously, but they can also become an invisible enemy when we assume that every thought reflects reality. That's because the mind doesn't just observe reality. It interprets, distorts, dramatizes, and often creates problems that don't even exist. Imagine you're walking down the street, and someone gives you a strange look. Within seconds, your mind starts speculating. Is there something wrong with me? Are they judging me? Did I do something weird? Before you know it, a simple glance has turned into a mental storm filled with assumptions and insecurities. But what if, instead of getting lost in those thoughts, you simply observed your mind's reaction without immediately believing it? Here's a crucial point. If you have no control over where your thoughts come from, why would you trust them blindly? Anyone who's practiced meditation knows this. Most thoughts that arise are random, disconnected, impulsive. If they were absolute truths, your mind would be stable and consistent all the time. And there's more. There's an interesting paradox. People talk to themselves more than they talk to anyone else in the world, yet they rarely stop to question the quality of that inner dialogue. How often does your mind encourage you? And how often does it criticize you? Ancient spiritual traditions have been warning about this for centuries. In Buddhism, the mind is compared to a restless monkey, jumping from thought to thought with no pause. In Hermeticism, it's taught that the mind can either be a slave or a master, depending on who's in control. Which brings us to the big question. If your mind is a whirlwind of non-stop thoughts, are you the thinker, or are you the one observing the thoughts? This simple shift in perspective can completely transform your relationship with your own consciousness. If you stop for a moment and pay attention, you'll notice that your mind is constantly creating stories. It replays old conversations, anticipates future situations, repeats phrases you've heard throughout the day. But here's something most people don't realize. This endless stream of thoughts directly shapes your emotions, your decisions, and ultimately, your life. The danger comes when we become prisoners of this internal dialogue without even noticing. The mind has a habit of telling stories about ourselves, about others, about the world. But are these stories actually true? Imagine someone who, from a young age, was told they weren't good enough. Over the years, their mind internalized this belief, repeating it in different ways. You're not capable. You're going to fail. You'll never be like everyone else. These words become a constant background noise, playing at low volume, but influencing every thought and decision. And the worst part? This person believes that inner voice is reality. The truth is, not every thought deserves to be taken seriously. Just like your body digests food automatically, your mind generates thoughts without your permission. Some of these ideas come from past experiences, while others are echoes of voices absorbed from the outside world. Family, media, society. Often what we call ourselves is nothing more than a collection of external influences we've never questioned. If you spend your day lost in your mind, listening to every thought without any filter, it's like living inside a fabricated reality, unaware that there's something beyond it. And that's the problem. When we believe we are our thoughts, we become trapped by them. Buddhism calls this the monkey mind, the tendency of the mind to jump from thought to thought without control. In Hermeticism, this is seen as an energetic imbalance, where the lower mind takes control over higher consciousness. That's why ancient spiritual traditions have always emphasized the importance of observation, not to suppress thoughts, but to recognize that you don't have to be ruled by them. When you start observing your mind closely, you discover something interesting. There's a space between thought and reaction, and within that space lies freedom. If a negative thought arises, you can simply watch it pass instead of following it. If an inner voice tries to sabotage you, you can choose not to listen. This small act of awareness is the first step toward reclaiming control over your own mental experience. So the real question is, if your mind is constantly generating thoughts but you don't have to follow them, then who's actually in charge? Everything in the universe begins in the mind. Before something manifests in the physical world, it first exists as a thought, an idea, an intention. This is the core teaching of the principle of mentalism, one of the Hermetic laws, which states, "The all is mind, the universe is mental." But what does that really mean? It means that your external reality is a direct reflection of your internal state. Every experience you go through is filtered by your mind. You don't see the world as it truly is. You see it as you are. If your mind is in constant conflict, your life will reflect chaos. If your mind is at peace, you will experience harmony. This isn't just philosophy. It's something anyone can test in real life. Think about a day when you woke up in a bad mood. Maybe you spilled your coffee, got stuck in traffic, and ran into people who seemed ruder than usual. Now think about a day when you woke up feeling good. Somehow, everything seemed to flow better. The situations were the same, but your perception was different. The same thing happens with your thoughts. If you identify with a negative thought, it becomes your truth. If you believe you're not capable, your mind will search for proof to reinforce that belief. If you see yourself as worthy and confident, your reality will adjust to reflect that. But here's the key. Thoughts come and go. They are not you. Most people mistake their thoughts for reality, believing that everything the mind says must be true. But a thought is just a mental event, a passing cloud in the sky of consciousness. Now, imagine for a moment that you're watching the sky. Some clouds are white and peaceful, others are dark and heavy. But regardless of the clouds, the sky remains unchanged. Your mind works the same way. You can observe your thoughts without needing to identify with them. This is the first step to using the law of mentalism in your favor, realizing that you are not your mind. You are the one observing it. When you truly understand this, something powerful happens. You stop being a slave to your thoughts and start directing them consciously. You become the architect of your own reality, instead of just reacting to whatever pops into your head. But how do you apply this in real life? How do you train your mind to work for you instead of against you? If you are not your thoughts, then who are you really? This is one of the deepest questions in spirituality. The mind is always talking, but there is something beyond it, something that simply observes. This silent observer is your true self. From an early age, we learn to define ourselves by our thoughts. I'm an anxious person. I'm bad with numbers. I'm someone who always has bad luck. But are these labels really who we are? Or are they just identities we've adopted over time without questioning them? The mind is like a mirror covered in layers of beliefs, memories, and external influences. If you've spent your whole life identifying with certain thoughts, it makes sense that you'd believe they define you. But think about it. Who is the one listening to those thoughts? When fear arises, something within you notices that fear. When a negative thought appears, there's a part of you that recognizes it. That act of noticing is the key. It means that you are not the thought. You are the one witnessing it. If a thought says, "I'm not good enough," that thought doesn't define you. It's just a visitor in your mind. You can observe it without attaching to it. The problem is that most people live on autopilot, absorbing thoughts without filtering them. If a negative thought arises, they believe it without question. If the mind creates a story, they assume it's real. But when you realize there is distance between you and your thoughts, everything changes. Imagine your mind is like a radio. It constantly broadcasts different stations, some peaceful, some chaotic, some inspiring, some destructive. If one station plays a song you don't like, do you have to listen? Or can you simply switch the channel? This is the secret to mental self-mastery. You don't have to fight your thoughts or force them to be silent. You simply have to choose which ones to engage with and which ones to let pass. And this leads to a simple but powerful practice. Close your eyes for a moment and just observe. Don't try to change anything. Just notice what arises in your mind. Do you see how thoughts come and go on their own? How they appear out of nowhere and then disappear? Now ask yourself, if thoughts come and go, who am I when they're gone? This question has the power to reveal something profound, that your essence is not in your thoughts but in the awareness behind them. And the more you strengthen this realization, the more freedom you gain. But if thoughts come and go on their own, where do they come from? And why do some thoughts repeat more than others? Knowing that you are not your thoughts is one thing, but experiencing it directly is something else entirely. To truly change your relationship with the mind, you need to practice. The silent witness exercise is simple yet powerful. It requires no belief, no effort, no complicated technique, just awareness. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Now just observe. Notice what's happening inside your mind. Maybe random thoughts appear, memories, plans for the future. Maybe your mind starts narrating what's happening, trying to label the experience. Just notice. Don't try to control, stop, or change anything. Your only task is to watch, like a spectator observing clouds drifting across the sky. Now pay attention to something curious. Who is observing these thoughts? Who is this silent presence that notices the movement of the mind but doesn't get caught up in it? If you can see a thought arise and disappear, that means there is space between you and the thought. You are the observer, not the observed. This exercise may seem simple, but practicing it regularly has a deep impact. The more you do it, the more you realize that you don't have to be dragged around by every thought that comes up. And here's a powerful insight. When you just observe without reacting, thoughts lose their grip on you. They come and go, but they no longer control you. Over time, this practice becomes a habit. You start noticing your mind in real time, throughout your daily life, and that gives you freedom. Inner silence doesn't mean the absence of thoughts. It means you are no longer trapped by them. Now, if thoughts are so fleeting and easily influenced, do they follow some hidden pattern? Is there an invisible structure governing how they arise and disappear? If you observe nature, you'll notice a repeating pattern in everything. Day turns into night. Seasons change. The ocean rises and falls. Everything follows a natural flow. The same principle applies to the mind. In Hermeticism, this is called the law of rhythm. It teaches that everything in the universe moves in cycles. swinging from one extreme to another. This means your mind also goes through phases, moments of clarity followed by moments of confusion, periods of inspiration alternating with periods of doubt. Most people make the mistake of fighting this flow. When the mind is calm, we want it to stay that way forever. When it's restless, we try to force it into silence. But resisting the natural rhythm of thoughts only makes the swings more intense. Think of the ocean. If you fight against a wave, the impact is stronger. But if you learn to move with it, you realize you can navigate the turbulence with much less effort. The same applies to the mind. Accepting the natural oscillation of thought doesn't mean being passive. It means understanding that no mental state is permanent. Like the tides, the mind moves back and forth, and your role isn't to stop that movement, but to learn how to observe it without being swept away. Now, you might be wondering, if mental rhythm is inevitable, how can we use it to our advantage? Many people believe that the key to inner peace is to completely control the mind, trying to silence thoughts or avoid the ones they consider negative. But this is one of the biggest misconceptions on the spiritual path. Thought itself is not the enemy. The problem isn't thinking, but rather identifying with every thought as if it were absolute truth. The more we try to control the mind, the more we fall into the trap of fighting against it. And it's this struggle that creates exhaustion and frustration. Try a simple experiment. Close your eyes and tell yourself not to think about a pink elephant. What happened? You thought about it anyway. That's the paradox of the mind. The more resistance we create against something, the stronger it becomes. This is why so many spiritual seekers struggle with meditation. They try to force a state of silence but end up frustrated because the mind keeps producing thoughts. The truth is, the mind will never completely stop. Just as the heart beats and the lungs breathe, the mind thinks. The secret isn't to stop thinking, but to stop clinging to thoughts. Imagine your mind as a river. You can throw yourself into the current and get swept away in every direction, or you can sit on the riverbank and simply watch the water flow. The thoughts keep moving, but you don't have to be carried away by them. This shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of trying to silence the mind, you learn to stop identifying with it. You realize that you can coexist with your thoughts without letting them control your life. The mind only becomes a problem when we assume that every thought is real. But what if you started seeing them as passing clouds in the sky of consciousness? If thoughts follow a natural rhythm, it makes sense that we can stabilize them by adjusting another fundamental rhythm: our breathing. The mind and breath are deeply connected. When we're anxious, our breathing becomes short and irregular. When we're calm, it slows down and deepens. What's interesting is that this process works both ways. Controlling your breath can directly influence your mental state. The rhythmic breathing technique is a powerful tool used by meditators, yogis, and occultists to balance the mind and create an inner state of serenity. It works by regulating the flow of breath to bring the mind back to the present. Here's a simple exercise you can practice anytime. Inhale through your nose while counting to 4. Hold your breath for a count of 6. Exhale slowly through your mouth while counting to 8. Repeat this cycle for a few minutes, keeping your full attention on the movement of your breath. This practice slows down mental activity and reduces identification with thoughts. The more you do it, the more you realize that your mind's internal rhythm can be adjusted. You just need to guide it instead of fighting against it. Now that we understand how rhythm influences thoughts, a new question arises. If every thought has a natural cycle, can we change its frequency and transform negative thoughts into something higher? If you've ever paid close attention to your thoughts, you've probably noticed an interesting pattern. For every negative idea that arises, there's a hidden positive counterpart. Fear has its reflection in courage. Doubt can be transformed into confidence. Chaos can give way to clarity. This happens because every thought follows the Hermetic principle of polarity. This principle teaches that everything has two poles, two ends of the same spectrum. Heat and cold, for example, aren't separate entities but simply different degrees of the same thing, temperature. The same applies to mental states. What does this mean? That you don't need to eliminate negative thoughts. You just need to shift them to a higher pole. Think of a scale of emotions. If you feel fear, that fear can be transformed into caution. If you feel anger, you can convert it into determination. It's not about denying what you feel, but realizing that there's a continuum between opposites. The mind follows whatever we focus on. If you focus on fear, it grows. If you focus on the possibility of overcoming it, courage starts to expand. This transmutation is the secret of mental alchemists. They don't fight against what they feel. They simply redirect their energy toward a higher state. But how do you do this in practice? How can you consciously move your mind from one pole to the other? True magic isn't about controlling the outside world. It's about learning to transform yourself. In Hermeticism, this ability is known as mental alchemy, the art of transmuting undesirable mental states into higher states of consciousness. But contrary to what many believe, this doesn't mean suppressing or denying negative thoughts. On the contrary, the key is to acknowledge them and redirect them. If a fearful thought arises instead of fighting it, ask yourself, what is the higher version of this thought? If fear comes from uncertainty, its higher version might be the confidence that every situation brings a lesson. If a thought of anger appears, its elevated form could be the strength to act with clarity. The mind works like a radio. The station you tune into determines the music you hear. The question is, are you adjusting your frequency consciously, or are you just letting it be shaped by the world around you? The practice of mental alchemy starts with small moments of awareness. The next time a negative thought arises, instead of automatically following that train of thought, try shifting its vibration. Ask yourself, if I viewed this from a higher perspective, what would I see? Over time, this exercise becomes a habit. You realize that you don't have to be a prisoner of your emotions, and that every thought can be transformed if you know how to adjust it. Now, this leads to an essential question. If we can transmute thoughts and choose our mental frequencies, how does this connect to spiritual practice in daily life? If there's one lesson that great spiritual masters have always taught, it's that the mind should be a powerful servant, not a tyrannical master. The problem is that most people live the opposite way. Instead of using the mind as a tool, they become slaves to it. The constant stream of thoughts controls their emotions, actions, and even their sense of identity. But here's a truth that few realize. You don't need to eliminate the mind to find peace. You just need to learn to put it in its proper place. Think of the mind as a sharp sword. If used without control, it can cause damage. But if you learn how to wield it, it becomes a powerful instrument for clarity, discernment, and creation. The key is cultivating meta-awareness, the ability to observe the mind without being ruled by it. This means that instead of getting swept away by thoughts, you see them as simple tools that can be used or discarded as needed. And how do you do this in practice? It starts with a simple act of presence. Whenever a thought arises, ask yourself, is this useful to me right now? If it's a constructive thought, use it. If it's a limiting thought, simply observe it and let it pass. When you develop this ability, your mind stops being a prison and becomes an instrument for spiritual evolution. But there's something even deeper. Many of the thoughts we carry aren't even ours to begin with. If we learn to recognize which thoughts come from external influences, we can filter what we truly want to keep in our consciousness. Not every thought that passes through your mind actually belongs to you. We live immersed in an ocean of external influences: media, social networks, other people's opinions, cultural and family beliefs. These influences shape our worldview without us even realizing it. And the most dangerous part? We often carry thoughts we've never questioned. The collective unconscious has been studied for centuries. In Hermeticism, it's seen as a current of mental energy shared among individuals, communities, and even entire civilizations. Have you ever noticed that when you enter an environment filled with fear, anxiety, or negativity, your mind starts reflecting those same patterns? That's because collective consciousness has a powerful impact on our individual minds. The real question is, are you thinking for yourself, or are you just repeating thoughts absorbed from your surroundings? Filtering external influences is essential to maintaining sovereignty over your mind. This doesn't mean ignoring the world or living in isolation, but rather developing discernment. When a thought arises, ask yourself, does this come from me, or is it an idea I absorbed from my environment? Those who learn to identify and filter collective thoughts become masters of themselves. They are not easily manipulated by the flood of information in the modern world. They consciously choose where to place their attention. And one of the most effective ways to do this is by developing a simple yet powerful habit. Before going to sleep, review the thoughts you had throughout the day and identify recurring patterns. Now take a moment to think. How many people go through life without realizing they're carrying thoughts that aren't even theirs? How many stay on autopilot, trapped in mental patterns they absorbed without question? If this content helped you see things differently, imagine how many others could break free from this mental prison. You can be part of this transformation with a simple action. Leave a like so this message reaches more people, and subscribe to the channel to keep receiving content that expands your awareness. Now let's go even deeper, because what comes next might completely change the way you interact with your own thoughts. The human mind is like a garden. If you don't pay attention to what's growing, weeds can take over. Throughout the day, we absorb thoughts from everywhere: media, conversations, social networks, emotionally charged environments. The problem is that if we don't filter these influences, they can become part of our identity without us even realizing it. That's why the nightly mental scan is an essential practice. It works as a mental cleanse before sleep, allowing you to release unnecessary thoughts and strengthen the ones you truly want to cultivate. Here's how to do it. Before going to sleep, take a few minutes to review the thoughts that dominated your day. Don't overanalyze them. Just observe. What patterns repeated today? Were there any negative thoughts that kept coming up? Were these thoughts useful, or were they just distractions? If you notice that you carried unnecessary worries or thoughts that don't truly belong to you, mentally say to yourself, "This is not mine. I choose to let it go." Now bring to mind a positive thought, an intention or something you're grateful for from the day. Directing your mind in this way before sleep strengthens your connection to what truly matters, reducing the influence of external noise. With consistent practice, you train your mind to be selective, allowing only the thoughts that serve your growth to remain. And when you reach this level of inner control, something powerful happens. You no longer just observe your thoughts. You begin to consciously shape the direction of your mind and, ultimately, your life. The mind can be either a prison or a gateway to freedom. It all depends on who is in control. Throughout this journey, we've explored the hidden secrets of thought and its connection to the Hermetic principles. We've seen that the principle of mentalism teaches us that external reality is a reflection of our internal state. We've understood that the rhythm of the mind follows natural cycles, and resisting them only creates suffering. We've learned that through polarity, we can transmute thoughts and elevate our consciousness. But none of this has any value unless it's put into practice. True transformation happens when we stop being prisoners of the mind and become its masters. When we stop following every thought automatically and start observing them. When we learn to flow with the rhythm of the mind instead of fighting against it. When we realize that every thought has an opposite and that we can choose which vibration we want to nourish. Unobserved thought can lead to confusion, anxiety, and suffering. But thought that is observed and consciously directed becomes a powerful tool for spiritual evolution. So the final question is, who is in control of your mind right now? The answer isn't in words, it's in how you choose to observe your thoughts from this moment on. If this reflection helped you see your mind in a new way, don't stop here. Transformation happens when knowledge turns into practice. So leave a like to strengthen this message. Drop a comment below sharing what resonated with you the most, and subscribe to the channel to keep exploring content that expands your awareness. And if you're ready to take this awakening even further, the next video is already available in the description and on the screen. Click now and continue this journey. See you there.